Good evening, everybody. It's 6:30. Welcome to the Audit and Accounts Committee. I'll go through the preliminaries. We're not planning a fire drill tonight, so if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the side of the room. Exit through reception and meet in War Memorial Park. This meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. Are we on webcasting, Phil? Thank you. And please can I remind members and officers that in order to be heard clearly within the room by those present and on the webcast, you must speak directly into your microphone, and the microphone stem can be moved so that you can get as close to your mouth as possible, but please don't move the bases around because that messes up the cameras and the way they work. Please switch your mobile phones to silent. We have, that's that piece done. We have a shorter agenda tonight to look forward to. I'll start with apologies for absence and substitutions. We have 3 apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Phillimore. I have apologies from Councillor Isaac. I have apologies from Councillor Rattigan. And we're also missing Councillor Gaskell. I don't know if he's delayed or late. We have no substitutions. We are quorate. We need 3 councillors to be quorate, and we have 5. Yeah, 5. I can count. That's handy as chair of Audit Committee. I'll move on to the next item, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I'm not seeing any, so we'll move on to item 3, urgent matters. Are there any urgent matters? I'm not seeing any, so we'll move on to item 4, the minutes of the last meeting held on the 29th of January 24. Are the committee happy to approve the minutes of the meeting held on 29 January 24 as a correct record?
Yes.
Agreed. I'm getting nods around the room. That's agreed. I'll sign the minutes and I'll hand those to the officer. Thank you, Phil. Before we take item 5, I was going to move the agenda around a little bit and we will take item 8, which is the property report. And that is so that the hard-working property officers and cabinet member who usually sit here to the very end of the meeting get to go home a little earlier.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm grateful for you giving me a life. Obviously, for our internal audit people, this is their life and they love every minute of it. So I'm sure that, yeah, all right. It's obviously, when we met last time in 29th of January, we talked about the annual property plan, which this obviously is built upon. This is a review for Q3, so it's actually an older report than the one you've seen in terms of the plan that you had last month, if it makes any sense. So I have no introduction because nothing's changed since I last spoke to you, unless anyone's got any questions.
Councillor Hussey.
Bit tangential this. What's happening to the review of our property to assess whether it is suitable for housing development?
We are going through all the sites we own at the moment and the land we own and reviewing it to see what the potential is. And obviously, it's conversations that we're quite aware of the limitations of the housing associations on what they want. So it's going to take time because it's always who's on the land at the moment. Does it have another purpose? Is it suitable for housing? And then there's a conversation around what's the viability of that. We also have to look at where it sits within our property investment strategy. Then it becomes subject to best value considerations and everything else in terms of how it fits in with that strategy. So it's really looking at what land is vacant and free, has no value, and then making a decision on it. And that review is taking place, but we have to go through the whole process to understand what properties are going to be in the mix at the end. But we actually own very little land that's empty.
Please come back. It's been running for 4 months, Kevin. How much longer is it going to take to complete?
It's being monitored by we've got a housing delivery board that are looking at certain sites. So we've gone through some already and there are recommendations for those. And then we're now going on a sort of a wider strategic land review. Yeah, I don't know when that will be complete.
Not to be answered now, but
We can come back to you. Yeah.
We'll
Are there any other questions or debate? I had a couple of questions, if I may, Liz. 7.2 on page 6 of 11, or page 108 of the larger pack. It says that in some cases rent reviews are referred to a third party to determine, and it's becoming more common. Is that becoming more common because there's greater disagreement? And if so, is that disagreement over price or the rent roll? And is there any opportunity for us to start those referrals earlier?
I would say some private companies are taking the view that they won't agree any uplifts unless they go to third party. So it is a sort of shift in the way they look at it, and in order to sort of show that they've achieved best value as well. In terms of can we start it any earlier, we are quite proactive with those and do seek a referral quite early on when we feel that negotiations aren't progressing at speed or as fast as we would like.
Great, thank you. If that's becoming more common, is it sector specific or is it across all of the sectors?
I suppose the most that I've seen at the moment seem to be, I suppose it's where we'd expect an uplift, which is why we're obviously pushing it further, which has tended to be in the industrial sector, but I can't say it's definitely sector specific.
Thank you. Councillor Tustain.
Thank you, Chair. Look at section 10 on the vacancies. It does say they could remain low compared to similar sized portfolios and actively marketed, and the demand for secondary retail and offices remains low. What's a bit more detail around that? I mean, have we got quite a lot of these? There's obviously a risk, as we said here. It's also indicated this could be a risk that we could end up with more of these. So, how much of this is part of the portfolio? What is this sort of secondary? Are we talking about sort of older, smaller premises, or what exactly are they?
I would say where we've got sort of the vacancies at the moment tends to be retail, and they're the ones that are more difficult to let. So that tends to be we've got some properties top of town, but it's not. We're still talking sort of under 20 properties. So in the scheme of things, it's not, and they tend to be smaller size, rather than and some offices which have been sort of harder to let.
And so based on that, will we then look at potentially redeveloping those if we feel that they're just not going to get let, or are we in any position to do anything like that?
There are one or two we're looking at. The problem is that they're very hard to redevelop depending where they are. The Mouse isn't particularly a problem at the moment, but certainly some of the ones we've got near the top of town, there is only a couple. They're not all necessarily suited to be something else because of where they're located. So it's a site-by-site basis in terms of we'll look at the site and make a decision. And obviously if it's in the town centre particularly, we'll have a conversation around the wider town centre strategy as to whether it could be reused for something else.
There's just one other thing I wanted to draw members' attention to and or ask a question of Sue, which relates to the table of rent reviews on page 108, page 6 of 11 of this report, item 7.1. And just in the context of those rent reviews, we've had a temporary or interim member of staff who's been addressing those and catching up. And I believe that that contract was due to end at the end of March, but I understand from conversations earlier that may be about to be extended to assist with that, if you could just confirm.
Yes, we are intending to seek approval to extend that, but that will be met from existing budgets.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any further questions, so I will ask the committee if they're happy to note the paper. That's agreed. Thank you. We'll move on to item 5, Internal Audit Progress Report, and I will ask the officer, Richard Bevan, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, this is the progress report for the work done by the internal audit team between July last year and February. And on table, the table on paragraph 4.1, page 11, summarises the audit assignments that we've completed in that time. And you'll see that we've given, of the 9, there's 2 with full assurance, 6 with a substantial assurance, and then 1 we've given a reasonable assurance. And the summary reports are shown in appendices 2 through to 10. Concerning recommendations, appendix 1 of my report shows the recommendations that are overdue for completion. They've gone past their originally agreed completion date. But you'll see in the table there is a comment from the relevant head of service concerning progress on those recommendations. I wasn't going to say any more. If got any comments or questions, please let me know.
Councillor Tustin.
I've noticed quite a few of these seem to have degraded down from a better grading to start with, and then they've gone down from sort of some of the things down to like substantial and things. Is there a particular reason we're seeing sort of a general pattern of that, or is it just because there's sort of
Is there one? Which one in particular are you referring to? I mean, yes. The depends on the scope of the particular audit that we were undertaking, where we may look at different areas, and so the level of assurance has changed. I'm just trying to look.
If I can help, Richard. So if we're looking at table 4.1,
yeah,
it would be bank reconciliation has gone up from reasonable to full.
Yeah.
Rent deposits has gone down to reasonable from substantial, and risk management's gone down to substantial from full.
Yep. So the bank reconciliation obviously gone up. So that was the first. Last year was the first year we looked at those processes. So there were quite a few control issues that we highlighted. They were corrected. We reviewed it again this year, and pleased to say that everything was as we would have expected. The risk management one, the change between full and substantial is just really a number of recommendations, probably 2 instead of 3 or something like that. So there's no overall change in concern, if you like. I always say to the committee that if there's a full or substantial, then from our point of view, the overall level of concern is that there isn't really. It's the control environment we're satisfied, pretty much satisfied with. The rent deposit one, which we've seen sort of drop. When this was last reviewed, we did just look at the rent process, so hence a substantial. This year, the audit highlighted some concerns around the overall system in which the housing team were using. They're using several disparate systems, which are legacy systems, so they're not as efficient as we would like. They were reflected in the recommendations, which have been completed. The main recommendation was around putting forward a business case for a new system, which went to our customer and digital board, I think last month, and they approved the new proposal. So from our point of view, it's moved on. So we were happy that that recommendation's been met. Obviously, we look at it in future. If they've got a new system, we will review processes within that new system. So that kind of explains those specific changes.
Are there any other questions on Richard's internal audit report?
I've got some more,
Councillor Tustin.
Yeah, thank you. I think something that sort of jumped out at me going through some of the risk stuff, and I think this is all in this particular audit report, and actually came out in the housing one, and then obviously talking about some of the IT risks and things. And I do think it strikes me as a sort of from a holistic perspective, it looks like IT seems to be an area that might need more review work. I don't know if there's sort of resourcing issues there, or quite what's the undercurrent, and what your thoughts are around that.
So the recommendations that are still remaining on my appendix 1, they relate to the external cyber security audit we had done last year. As you see there, I think there was something like nearly 40 odd recommendations from that review. So we're down to the last couple, which IT are still working on. We still have this year to do the corporate risk register on audit of the cyber element of the corporate risk register, together with critical systems audit. So hopefully any issues that you may have concerns about, we'll be able to pick them up and identify them in those upcoming reviews. We've normally done them earlier in the year, but with resource and our own issues, we've just pushed them back towards the end of this year.
And there's another side on risks. Something that I've found quite difficult to follow is seeing where some things have moved off and seeing where the completion is. So I don't know if it's just me the way I'm reading the report, but it hasn't bounced out. So some things have disappeared, but we don't have sort of the resolution that got them removed.
I mean, yeah, I suppose once the recommendation is completed, we obviously remove it from our list of ongoing recommendations. We still keep a record of all the completed recommendations. So for the purpose of this report, yes, they kind of drop off. So if there was something last time I was here that isn't here this time, then it's been completed.
So just following up on.
And I'm hoping that by that process we give the assurance to the committee that we're bringing you the concerns, the outstanding parts. From my point of view, if we're not bringing it to you, it's complete, and I hope you can take our word for that.
I have a question, if I may. Audit recommendation 6 on health and safety. The note there is that, well, that was due to be completed February 23, revised to October 23, and then the comments are audit comment, no update received in time for this report, and that was the 19th of Feb. Have you had an update from the head of organisational development?
No, not yet.
I think the committee should consider whether or not we need to invite the head of HR and organisational development to come along and explain what's going on there. I don't know. I can see arguments both for and against. I sit on HR committee, as does Councillor Tustain, and I think our HR organisation's in rude health. Whenever I see health and safety and an orange flag, that is obviously something that we just need to think about. I don't know if anyone else has a view. Councillor Hussey.
On the same point, I'm concerned that it just says it's revised. It's gone back from February to October, and it's still not complete. And it just seems like there's slippage, and it's not under control. So I wouldn't say invite, but I would mandate them to come here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the essential effect of what.
And I wouldn't want to wait, but on the calendar of meetings, I don't know when the next meeting is.
So I think, from memory, there may be a system, an IT type system issue behind this. That means that those hybrid templates haven't been able to be carried out. I think there might be a technical issue, but I'm not the expert on it. I think what we'll do is we'll ask the head of HR and organisational development to provide an update to the committee by email within a week of the meeting, assuming that she's at work and is able to do that. I think that's probably the right thing to do. Councillor Hussey?
If there is an IT issue, as you referred to, it should have been mentioned in this report. This report is, on this item, it's not fit for purpose, because there's an answer potentially there. The head of the department should have been asked to provide a more objective comment rather than this revision of several months and then still miss the target. I'm not happy with it.
It is unusual for us to not have an update on a paper like this, and I suspect that there's some good reason for it. Paul?
Yeah, just to give a little bit of information on that one, we are aware that we did lose our health and safety officer. So there wasn't anyone in post for a period of time, but we do now have a health and safety officer who's been with us. Is that, I think it's a couple of months now, is it? So that might be one of the reasons behind it. But from trying to give an assurance to a committee that we do actually follow these recommendations up, which is a monthly process, and if I'm not going to get an answer, that's why we're coming to you as the committee to inform you of that situation.
Okay, so for the minutes, Phil, just to make sure absolutely clear, we need an update from the head of HR and OD within a reasonable time frame, say the next 10 days would be fine, by email to all the members of the committee. Thank you. Any other questions that anyone wants to raise? I think there's, and we talked about this in the pre-meeting, but I just wanted to raise it again now. There's this sort of grouping of, there's obviously a spread of significant controls that span a number of issues, but there's two issues that jump out that have some interdependencies that are creating 3 or 4 of these recommendations to be held up. One of them sits around IT, and I'm delighted that Councillor Tusnane raised that, because I think, you know, we've teased out over the course of the last year whether or not the IT department was, I'm not going to say the word failing, was struggling with some of the updates and technology changes, and with the implementation of some new systems. And there's a lot of good work going on there. But I know that the answer that we got about this time last year was that there'd just been a restructure, it'd been acknowledged, and there'd been a restructure within IT, and that was driving forward change. And I think the point that Richard made about, you know, there were 30 or 40 on here a year ago, and there's now 5 or 6 or 3 or 4 that relate to IT. But it can be quite challenging, I think, from having done this job to some extent. You can end up with interdependencies where you can't move one server because you can't update a piece of software until you've mothballed something else. So, and I think we're in that situation. But to give members some comfort, I think the officer, UC Valorum, is coming to the next meeting to talk to us about cyber once the cyber audit's finished. So I think we can pick that up then.
Good.
Darcy.
Good, because we shouldn't be getting these assurances from you. It should be from the officer.
Thank you. I think, Councillor Suster.
I'm revisiting, I'm just going through, because I did make some notes when I was reading through this, and this is about the issues about things being closed and the IT stuff. And actually I did make something, because there's actually section 106, there was issues around IT support as well. I think obviously housing was the IT systems, there's a couple of things. So I do think that we might need to look a bit more in more depth around whether IT are getting, they've got enough resourcing, and whether we need to get anything done around that one. But also I want to just go back, and I appreciate what you said about trusting on closed items. But I think we need to see a bit of continuity to see if something does disappear. If we can't see that it's closed and why it's closed, I think it would just give reassurance. There's not a case of not trusting you. And I know if you know what I mean, it's kind of like, it's difficult, isn't it? Because it's like, oh, it's gone. Why is it gone? Maybe it has been done. I mean, one of the points was on like the cyber security that you talked about, and the fact, and I did go through and I thought, oh yes, it has been put on, and I think there was an email went out to councillors to do their training. I think most people did, and I checked and I found it on the system, but I had to route about to find it. If we had the closed item on there for the following meeting, it would kind of like say, yeah, there you go, there it is, done, dusted and finished.
Are you looking for a list with the items and what's been closed, or just a number of closed items, Jackie?
It would be the item that's closed and just saying these have been closed. I mean, it's just, I don't think it will be too onerous.
Thicker papers for everyone, but I understand. Paul?
So there's a couple of things we could do there. We could obviously give members that the committee access to our spreadsheet of closed items on our SharePoint page, so you can access that as and when you wish. Or 2, we will take the outstanding list we have for this meeting, and we'll highlight those that are closed at the next meeting, just for the ones that were meeting before. Okay.
I think both or the latter, Paul. The other grouping of significant risk matters there relate to relate mostly to information governance. And we had a brief discussion beforehand that I'd just like to get on the public record about. I think Councillor Faulkner summed it up really well. It's about paper records and the transition from analogue or paper to digital, and the number of paper records that the council still has, and how that overlaps with quite a few of these information governance risks, control risks. I don't know if anyone wants to comment any further on that, but I think the direction of travel on that is positive and is acceptable. It's much slower than the priority of some of the other significant control matters on here, and I think there's reasons for that. But I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything else on that. There you go, Councillor Hussey. More reassurance from me, not officers. Should be in the report, is what he said. It wasn't on mic, just for anyone else. I will consider that paper finished, unless anyone's got anything else they want to raise. Thank you, Richard. Excellent internal audit work, as always. It is very thorough, and it does give us quite a high degree of reassurance about our control framework, so thank you. Oh, is the committee happy to note the report? Noted. Noted, thank you. We move on to agenda item number 6, which is the internal audit plan for 2024-25. This one is not a paper that we note. This is a paper that we are asked to approve the internal audit charter 2024-25 and to approve the internal audit plan for 2024-25. I will ask the officer, Paul Gundry, to talk to the report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you've mentioned, I think this is the only report I bring to the committee and ask for approval. And it comes every year. So this is looking at the 24-25 financial year and the work that we'll be looking to do to give the committee the relevant assurances. 2 parts to this one. One is the audit charter, which is Appendix 1, page 65. There's only one change from the charter that was approved by the committee this time last year, and that's just to reflect it's for the 24-25 financial year. And then the second part is internal audit plan, which you can find in Appendix 2, which is on page 75. And that is the list of audit assignments that we're going to carry out during 24-25. And I ask the committee if they'll approve both of those documents, please.
Thank you, Paul. Does anyone have any questions? First, about the audit charter, the internal audit charter, Appendix 1. I don't see any questions, but I did have one that I just wanted to just flag up for the committee. I don't think it requires a change to the charter, but if you look at page 69 and the table at section 10.2, the charter sets out how the internal audit team define the control weaknesses that we've just been talking about, and how the expected timeframe for addressing those. So if we look at, let's look at the significant one, because that's what we were talking about, quite a lot of significant control matters. And the implementation is within 3 months of the final audit report. Now, I just wanted to just draw attention to members that if there is a significant control weakness, and the internal auditors discuss that with the head of service or whoever it may be who's responsible for that control, and they say that that's not achievable within 3 months, and give good reasons for it, at the moment, that is to the internal auditor's discretion to set a different deadline to that, and that doesn't come through in the reports we get. So, for example, they might set a 5-month timeline, and then that would be the timeline that would sit in the reports we've just looked at, and then if that gets pushed out by another 3 months, that would then be an 8-month timeline, and so on. I just wanted members' views really on whether or not we're happy or comfortable with that, or whether we need a flag to say that this one has an extended timeline already agreed, and there are good reasons therefore.
I think it should be flagged, and I think instead of saying good reasons, the reasons ought to be listed, because we may not agree with those extenuating circumstances or whatever. The decision should be made by, or should be at least notified to us in sufficient detail that we can comment, and maybe even in exceptional circumstances override.
I think it's a good point, Councillor Hussey. I think that I think there's a there's a practicality here to many of these control weaknesses. Some very few probably can be dealt with quite quickly within a week or so, but quite a few of them may take longer than 3 months, and there'll be very good technical or practical reasons therefore. But I do think that that is a blind spot in the reports we get, and I would like to just leave it with officers to have a think about how we address that going forward. Paul.
I can answer that one now, Chair. What we were going to propose to do is in the summary audit report that you receive, in the recommendations boxes, we'll actually note where we've got the completion date. If that is extended, as per example you've given, we'll actually note it there. But then we'll also note it on the summary of the recommendations tables that comes in the progress report as well, so then at least you can track it.
I think that'd be a great improvement. Thank you. Councillor Faulkner.
Yeah, just make an observation. As I see it as an audit committee, we don't want to get under the slippery slope of starting to engage as if we were officers, i.e. We disagree that your resources are adequate or whatever. And we need to make sure that it is being considered by the officers and the audit function in the correct way. It's a very fine balance of how you do that and not sink down into starting to act as if we were actually officers.
I think it's a really good point, Councillor Faulkner. I think the distinction is that where we're reviewing pushed out dates, if we don't know that that's already on an extended date that officers have agreed, which is at their discretion and which is absolutely correct, then we can't necessarily exercise our scrutiny function on that as effectively at this meeting. I don't know if you agree with that, or okay. Thank you. That was the audit charter. Just moving on to the audit plan, which is Appendix 2 on page 75. Are there any questions? Richard?
I'm sorry about this, but this struck me as being a bit unusual, but nevertheless, I'm not sure how comprehensive it is. I have no feeling because I don't know how many audit days you have, and I don't know what contingency there is. And it all looks very routine. You're doing things every year. It's not risk-based in any way. Is there any way that you risk-base these within this? And how would and have you had discussions with the senior management team over what's in the audit plan? So you've taken. I find it a bit surprising that there's nothing there that isn't sort of annual or biannual. If you see what I'm twice every other year. I don't know whether that's biannual or what. I'm not really good at these sort of things. But the I do figures, not words. The thing is, there doesn't seem to be anything that's out of the ordinary. It all seems totally routine. You know, you've got a report that doesn't allow for. So just talk me through that and tell me what the contingencies are and how you risk-base things.
Yeah, so the information you're after is actually in the body of the report. In terms of, I'll take the senior leadership team first. Page 64, paragraph 3.5.1, under consultation. It makes reference to being as consulted with SLT, and they're happy with the content of the audit plan. Yeah. Okay. In terms of contingency, that's on page 63, 2.2.9. We're carrying 92.5 days contingency next year. And in terms of risk assessment, we look at paragraph 2.2.6. It gives you a short paragraph around risk assessment. So looking at the audit plan itself, corporate risk register we will do annually because they are the risks that the SLT are telling me are corporate and most important to the organisation. So I feel we should be doing those every year. And excuse me, this year's the first year that we did those, so the next year will be the second year. The core audits are primarily your financial systems. These are the ones that feed into the statement of accounts in terms of where we'll audit the control process, and if they're right, then at least the external auditor can rely on the figures that come out of the systems for statement of accounts. And then looking at the other key audits, they are done on the risk assessment as referenced in the paragraph 2.2.6. Those areas that I class as being high risk I will do every year because they're high and I think we should be. Medium risk we'll do every 2 years. So for 24-25 we'll be doing those. For last year was a different set, next year will be a different set as well.
Okay, well, there's 92.5 days for contingency, but I don't know what your total audit days is. Sorry.
I haven't got that to hand, but I can provide it to the committee if they wish to know the number of days.
I think it's significant, and I accept what you say, but I'm just concerned that it does. I mean, even the high risk things, you carry them out annually, and obviously you carry out annually the things you need for your internal audit opinion, which is very important, and they'd be annual. But it just seems to me that there's nothing new in this.
I'm going to come to Councillor Hussey. I think there's another way of asking a similar question, which is, and I was planning to ask Paul this anyway. Do you feel that internal audit is adequately resourced for the job that you feel needs to be carried out?
Yes, I do.
So I only worked out the 1.8 FTEs at 220 days a year, but that gives you 396 audit days. So that's possibly there or thereabouts on audit days. Councillor Hussey.
I don't understand high risk. I'm looking now at page 85, and just rather than generalise from particular, let's look at a particular one. Information management.
That's the next paper.
Page 85.
That's the next paper.
Is that the next page? Oh. We're talking about risk though, and high risk. I don't know how it's calculated, and for me, if something is high risk, then you need it more hands-on. It ought to be reviewed more frequently than annually, unless you can assure this committee that it's not that high that when you need to come back once a quarter. How is it high risk if you can just sit back and wait for another year and maybe there's no progress? I don't understand. So please educate me.
We're looking at functions, service areas, rather than risk, and we're looking at the risks within the service. So take a payroll system, we're looking at the risks within the payroll system. That's what the internal audit would do. And I wouldn't expect, unless someone wants to educate me otherwise, I wouldn't expect to be looking at high risk payroll risks every month, every quarter.
Councillor Hussey.
Yeah, I'm still understanding. If it's high risk, I want to have an impact assessment in the event. What is the likelihood of an issue actually occurring, and what's its impact? That's a normal risk assessment.
Yeah, no, or maybe in terms of reviewing the functions within the organisation to come up with the audit plan, maybe I should drop that word risk, because I think that means something different to you than it does to me when I'm carrying out an assessment to determine what audits I want to carry out in my annual audit plan.
we all ought to understand what high risk means, and there ought to be an impact assessment.
Can I cover it if I may? I think this is a really interesting discussion because, and I asked a question about who decides what goes on this list, and how does this committee put things onto this list, and or does the senior leadership team put things onto this list, and or is that the internal auditors at the chief internal auditor's discretion, Paul's discretion? I approached this the same way as Richard did, and I looked at it, but I was scratching my head trying to work out what else I would add to the list. And the reason being that we've got bank reconciliation on there, which is cash. We've got local tax, which is £10 million of our income, our net income, but we collect a lot more than that on behalf of Hampshire and the police and the fire service. And payroll is probably our largest cost. And so that's audited every year. And then you've got other key balance sheet items like corporate debt and creditors and fixed asset register. So I was left scratching my head slightly thinking, where else should one look? And my instinct was the same as Richard's, but I couldn't really come up with any answers. And that's why I asked the question about resourcing as well. If that helps, or Richard.
I mean, I understand that you're looking at the whole environment when you're judging your audit risk. So it's what services are likely to provide the most fruitful and successful audit. I'm trying to, it's not really the way you look at it, but nevertheless, the things that are likely to go wrong are the things in the whole environment, aren't you, you're looking for here? And that's not quite the same as high risk in the risk register. That's the thing, really. I understand that. But I was just concerned that it's funny how things that are high risk and do it annually. That was my point.
And just coming back on that, if I may, in terms of our assessment, when Richard joined me, he looked at the audit plan and he said, well, maybe we should be doing other things. I said, well, you look at it and you compare that to what else you think we should be doing, and we've got it covered just like you've done. And I've done that with other internal audit colleagues as well. I think the most important thing to remember is we're district council, not a county council.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. On the risk, on page 11, you've got the definition of risks in terms of fundamental, significant merits of tension, in terms of how these would impact the council, etc. Again, I would make the point, you've got a high risk thing. If we take the major projects board, which is made up of senior leadership team, etc., then that's meeting, I think, is it every 2 months or 3 months? They're meeting regularly because it is such an important activity. But in terms of audit, do you audit that after every meeting, or do you do the audit annually to ensure that the processes, etc., are all in place and are being followed? You don't start to micromanage what is actually going on a working basis.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. So we will look at the governance arrangements as an example that's in place in the project board. I think to say monthly. They meet monthly. So when we come to do our annual audit, we'll say, right, so one of the controls is that they meet monthly to discuss X, Y, and Z. So we will look, have they met monthly? Yes or no? And it's that approach, as an example.
Thank you. I think at the core of this is a principle about internal audit has to stay. It can't become complacent, I guess is what I'm getting at there. And so if you want to have a think about how you give us more comfort and or next time about how you successfully address the risk of becoming complacent, because I think the internal audit work is very good and is holistic, but perhaps, yeah, I don't know whether just some thoughts around how you stay fresh, I guess.
An example of how we stay fresh, as I mentioned last year, was this financial year is the first year we introduced the corporate risk register risks. So again, that then gives the committee the assurances of the corporate risks in their own entity, rather than just risk management as a whole process.
And I think that's a great example, actually. And I just draw members' attention. I think it was the prior paper where the internal auditors audited one of the corporate risk register items. So I'm looking at page 41 onwards, and what we have there is a list of the controls that were looked at, and a summary of what was tested and what was noted. And it's a different style of report to those that we've had before, and it's good. It's very thorough and it's holistic in that respect. So, but I think it's a really important discussion, and I'm glad we've had it, and I'm happy to have it again next year, because I think it is, there are three legs to the stool that protect the finances of this organisation: external audit, internal audit, and this committee. And so it's incredibly important that we tease this stuff out, and the work you do. Thank you. If there are no more questions, I'd like to move that we approve that paper. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I'd like to move on to item 7, which is a review of the corporate risk register. And we're being asked to note the contents of the report on this one. And again, it is, I'll hand over to Paul, who's the officer responsible for this.
Thank you, Chair. As the members will note, this is the 6-month report that comes due. It's in the same format. Just a bit of context, SLT carry out a review every 6 months of the corporate risk register, and this report is just highlighting the outcome of that review. For the assistance of the committee, we've got a diagrammatic version of the risk register on page 79, paragraph 2.3. And the only thing I just wanted to share with the committee is that SLT have merged 2 of the corporate risks that reported 6 months ago to committee. It's listed in 2.2. So that was the major strategic partnerships stroke projects and the community's relationship and partnerships risk. That's been merged into the major strategic partnerships, relationships and projects risk. The reason why that was merged is because there seemed to be a lot of duplication between those 2 risks, and it just made sense to put them together. I wasn't going to say more than that, Chair, so just ask the committee to note the paper, please.
Thank you, Paul. I'll kick this one off. We had a conversation earlier about where this council's undergone a telephone outage for the last 2 weeks. And we had a brief conversation earlier about where that risk of the phone line going down, where that would sit within these corporate risks. And I'd just like to go through the answer again, because I think it's illustrative of how our risk framework works and how our control frameworks work.
So I would expect to see that in the department's service risk register, which each service has one. And again, that's audited as part of our risk management audit that we do, and I think that's noted in the papers in the previous paper. And from an internal audit review point of view, we do have an audit called critical systems, where we look at the backup processes around that are meant to be in place, make sure they're working. So we would cover that in that audit. So we've got 2 prongs there, one from the risk management audit as well as the critical systems audit.
So basically there's an operational risk level beneath this strategic risk level. Councillor Tustain.
So actually that leads into my question quite nicely. These obviously cover quite a broad range, and we end up with a sort of what could potentially be a homogenised risk, where there could be some things that are potentially quite low risk, but we've got actions in here like this. So what I'm a little concerned about is whether we're missing visibility on some areas that actually could be quite high risk that are then getting downgraded because of other gradings of lower level risk, because obviously when you look at the status and there's some of these things, they talk about an awful lot of different actions and things that are going on. So I just wondered if there's any clarity around that.
That's like high risk elements buried within a lower risk category.
Again, because it is high level, which is what it's meant to be. Again, going back to the service risk, there are some linkages into those service risk registers which feed up into the corporate, and there no doubt will be some high risk at service risk level, but capturing the overarching view of each of these 10, I think we've got there, forms into a medium risk. I hope that helps.
I think that reiterated what I said, but it kind of doesn't reassure me particularly, because I'm a bit worried that we could be missing things. And I know, obviously, again, going back to what Councillor Faulkner was saying, we don't want to be doing, getting into doing your territory and doing your job, but it's obviously, it's just, if there was something, how would we know, and how could we be aware of that?
I'm hoping that's something that will be picked up when we do the internal audits of each of the corporate risks, where we look at the controls in place and determine that we're happy with what's in place. I don't know how else we could get that to you.
Are there any other questions on the corporate risk register? I think we should just draw attention to the one red item on the list, which is information management, which just comes back to that discussion we were having earlier about converting paper records to digital and how they're stored, archived, destroyed, in line with GDPR and other risks that relate to that. And if you've got a comment on that, Paul.
Only other than we've got some outstanding recommendations on information management, very much on the paper-based side of things, which was in the previous paper. The reasons for it being high risk because of the sheer amount of information we do have.
Do you think the organisation is taking it more seriously because it's red?
I think they are, and again, going back to the outstanding recommendations, we're happy with the progress that's being made on those as well. There's a lot of work being done, and again, this falls into that category of a significant recommendation that is not going to be done in 3 months. But from my point of view, I can see work being carried out, and it's being taken seriously.
Councillor Tustain.
So 2 questions on that, number, which goes back to something else. Is there enough resource to get this work done, and are there any underlying IT system issues around this as well?
I don't know. I'd have to go back to the service lead on those 2.
From the conversation earlier, I think the delivery of some of this information management stuff is patchy across the organisation. Some teams have done some of the smaller teams in particular have done theirs and did it quite some time ago, and some other teams are perhaps only just now getting round to it. But I think they're both great questions about resource and IT, and I think we'll raise that IT question with UC at the next meeting when he's here, I mean, we'll continue to ask the resource question. Richard.
Just one minor point, really. I mean, I think the thing about information management is and information governance is really that there are always going to be high risk because there are things you just cannot control. I mean, there are people who inadvertently are going to send information out that they shouldn't send out. They're going to send checks out to the wrong people. It's just inevitable that these things are going to occur. So it's always going to be high risk, however good the systems are. I think when I look back at some of the traumas that I've been through, there's just no way you could actually legislate for some of those things to happen. It's just
the power of human error. Paul?
Totally agree. Human error is the biggest control weakness in any organisation. But what I would say is that providing we as an organisation are carrying out those governance arrangements, we're doing our training for staff, etc., if we have to report anything to the ICO, we can demonstrate all the steps we've got in place that will assist us greatly in an outcome from them.
Councillor Tusting.
I said we have had 2 data protection breaches in October. I think I don't know if it was in previous reports that we talked about this before. How do we compare to other local authorities? And because it 2 data breaches is 2 data breaches, and obviously we don't know how severe they are as well, which is quite concerning.
Yeah, I can't answer that again. It's back to the service lead, but I know that the committee do receive papers on the data breaches ISO, so that may be a question for them.
One of them related to a letter going to a vulnerable person in the wrong circumstances. I can't remember the other one.
That was those 2.
Yeah. So, and again, they were both down to human error, and I believe we haven't had an answer from the ICO yet, the Information Commissioner's Office on those yet. So, if there's no more questions, I'd like to move that the committee notes the report. Noted. Thank you. We'll move on. Thank you both. Thank you, Paul. Got a bit of a grilling tonight, but it's wow. That's the advantage of a slightly shorter agenda. We're able to focus on internal audit a little bit more. Thank you for the work you do on behalf of the committee, both of you. Moving on to agenda item 9, Treasury Management 2022-23 Quarter 3 report. I think we're being asked to note this report. I'll hand over to Adam Swain, the officer, to talk us through.
Thank you, Chair. Yep. So this report shows the activity within the Council's Treasury Management function from 1st of April to 31st of December last year, and the committee asked to note the contents. Total net income from Treasury Management for 23-24 is forecast to be 5.42 million, a return of 4.29%. This is a 0.74 million above forecast income, which was 4.68 in the budget for 23-24. And this additional income is partly due to the timing of capital expenditure, and so it's been slightly slower than expected. So we've had higher investment balances for the year, which has resulted in the increased income. The actual rate of return is around what we'd budgeted for. And the only other thing I wanted to bring to the committee's attention is the value of external funds at the end of December was 73.29 million. These have increased just over 2 million in the first 9 months of 23-24. There is a unrealised loss of 1.73 million at the moment since the purchase of these funds, but there's currently a statutory override, which means that there is no net impact on the council's income until those assets are disposed of. So at this stage, that 1.73 doesn't get realised, but bonds are continuing to improve, and they have done over the last few weeks as well. And that was all I was going to cover, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Are there any questions? I think it's a good paper, and we go through these investments every meeting or every quarter. It does lead me to the question that I've asked the last couple of meetings: do we need to see these reports every quarter, or could we move to 6 months? I'm just conscious about the work programme that we're going to talk about again. I know certainly Councillor Rattigan's view. I'll just leave that out there. We don't need to vote on it. I think we have the same question over the property paper as well, whether we need to review that quarterly, given that there's not a huge amount of change in there. Councillor Hussey.
I agree with you. I think we should only get a report if there's, in the officer's view, there's something exceptional.
I think that's a good idea. Given that we're low on numbers tonight, I won't make a motion for that, But I think that we'll raise it again when we've got more councillors here, and see if people are interested in moving to 6 monthly for those. I think last time we asked as well, we asked officers and said, would it relieve your workload? And I think the answer was not much. But I'm happy to. We'll have them every week then, for people who didn't hear that. I'll take that paper as noted. Are we agreed?
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 10, the Audit and Accounts Committee work programme. To those of you watching at home or with the public report pack, there were 4 items on the committee work programme. We've identified that there were quite a few items missing off of that, and Phil in Democratic Services has kindly gone round and given us an update, and I think that will be published on the website at some point. I just wanted to just talk through that. So we've got essentially 2 audit style papers that will come forward, one being the audit results report, one being the planning report for the coming year. And as Adam identified earlier, the audit results report will be thinner than usual because of the changes that DLUC is proposing to do with regards to audit waivers. So we'll get what's called a disclaimed opinion. What that means is that, well, it means that we won't have our numbers externally audited anywhere near as thoroughly as normal in a year where we have gone through a significant financial systems upgrade, which is possibly one of the worst situations to have had that happening. But it's debatable whether it puts slightly more onus on us as a committee. We are now the backstop, whereas before we were relying on the external auditors to act as that guardian. So to some extent, we're a 2-legged stool for this year, in the analogy I used earlier. I don't think there's any answer to that other than we bring those accounts forward and we do our job, but I just wanted to just flag it up for people. Then we have the annual property plan year end, so the annual property plan report, and we have the housing benefit subsidy certification report, which is another report from the auditors on that subject. We are missing and will be adding the annual governance statement 2023-24, the local code of corporate governance 24-25, a report on the viewing of social networking sites, 6 monthly update. That's normally quite a short report. Famous last words. And then the Regulation of Investor Powers Act annual report, or the RIPA policy. Again, usually a short report, but nevertheless still on the agenda. And then we'll have the internal audit annual report from Paul Gundry next time, and we'll have the fraud update, protecting the public purse report as well. Sorry, just to draw your attention to the internal audit report above. That is 23-24. In the box on the right hand side, it says 22-23. That's incorrect. It's 23-24. And then, even though Phil did a sterling job of capturing most of the items that we've missed, there are 3 more which are not on that list, and we'll come on to talk about what we're going to do about that. One is the annual Treasury Management Report, so the investments report that we've just done, but the annual one. Second is the internal audit progress report, so Richard Bevan's report that we've been through tonight on the next quarter. And then we've mentioned several times that the head of IT, I hope I got his job title right, Juicy Valorum, is going to come along and talk to us about cyber on the basis that the cyber audit will have finished, and we can raise some of these questions about IT resourcing and how the restructure's gone as well, I think, at that point. So a very full agenda for June. We also may have the 2022-23 accounts that we may table at that meeting, or we might table at a later meeting. So I think Adam and I are going to talk about how that might work, and when Sue's back from holiday, work out how that's going to sit together. And we may have 2 meetings, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We may have a June meeting, and we may look to have a July meeting as well. The alternative is that we crack through the papers at a pace and only ask the really important questions, although that's sometimes slightly more difficult easier to say than to do, I think. I don't know if anyone's got a view on that. I know Councillor Fillimore would already be complaining about the length of the agenda. He's not here, so I'll do it on his behalf. Councillor Tustain.
Yeah, I'm going to make a comment on that, and I think even though we might want to crack through it on the meeting, the issue will be getting through reading it, you know, and I think that will be the challenge. I think that's what Councillor Fillimore would say as well, because it just wouldn't be feasible.
I think you're absolutely spot on. Adam, can you, with the local governance statement and the annual governance statement, the local code of conduct, corporate governance, in particular, because I think they're quite long and wordy from memory. Is there a chance that we could get those slightly earlier and then still publish in the pack later? I don't know if the earlier councillors get sight of some of these things, the better.
We can certainly try. That's something we will be drafting alongside the accounts. It might be that they don't have to come to the June meeting. We could push those back potentially to a later meeting if you'd rather, but we would ideally try and get that published alongside the accounts, which should be the end of May. So there's possibility to do that.
Councillor Faulkner?
On those two items, will they have changed significantly from the previous year? The annual governance statement and the local code of corporate.
There may be some changes on the annual governance statement because it's obviously reflecting the prior year and kind of what's gone on. So it's not just a refresh, and we are internally looking at how we're writing that as well. So there could be some big changes to that potentially.
So what I'm hearing is that a track changes version might not help us.
Possibly not.
No. Okay. I think that is the list of work, and I think that we'll do some surgery on that and work out how we're going to get through it all and keep the pack sizes manageable and the agenda manageable, and we'll come back to committee and tell you what we're planning to do. I hope that's okay. Adam.
Sorry, I was just going to add. I think a couple of years ago there certainly was a meeting in June and in July. Part of that was to do with the when the accounts were due to be approved. So that the reason the meeting in July is being taken out was it wasn't needed last year to have two, but it certainly has been an additional meeting over the summer because of sort of the amount of work, I think.
Thank you. It just leaves me to go through the action list. There's 3 actions on there from prior meetings brought forward. One is Arling Close still to agree a date or for it to come in and do some investment training with us. Obviously that training was in the Treasury Management Policy that went forward to Council, so it's quite important that happens. But we'll wait for dates on that one. We've talked about the head of IT and DT coming to the meeting. That's the second item there. And the third item I alluded to earlier, which is that we will address that in due course, but probably in the next municipal year. At that, I will, unless there's anything else anyone wants to raise, I'll call the meeting closed at 19:39. Thank you.